Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We're continuing on our journey of Amud Yomi. We started Masechet Succah yesterday, and we are on Daf Bet, Amud Bet, the very beginning, top line of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned for Aliyat Neshama of Shlomo ben Yitzchak Chaim, Alav Shalom, and has been dedicated also by Michael and Daniela Rosen for safety of Klal Yisrael, specifically the Matzav in Eretz Yisrael, and for the speedy return of the hostages. The learnings of this week has been graciously dedicated by the Shea family, Dayan family, Kohen family. Should be an ultimate zchut for all their mishpachot, Bezrat Hashem, Amen. And the Amud Yomi this month has been also sponsored by Dr. Yoram Nasir in memory of Avraham ben Yehuda, and for the Refuah Shlema of Sharon ben Rivka. Last but not least, this learning is dedicated for the Refuah Shlema of Rachel Simcha Bad Nahid, that should have full recovery of Refuah Shlema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. So we started Masechet Succah in the discussion of what exactly constitutes a kosher schach, a kosher wall of Sukkah. The height of the Sukkah was discussed in the very beginning, and we mentioned that the word Sukkah itself comes from schach. Unlike what we think that the Sukkah is the had, really the kashrut of Sukkah depends directly on the matzav, the situation of the schach. And if it's higher than what it should be, it could render the entire Sukkah pasul regardless of what it is made of. So we had three-way machloket amoraim. Why a Sukkah that's higher than 20 amah, about 30 feet tall, would be pasul? So Rava said it's because you have to, because people have to know that they're sitting in the Sukkah. And if you come into a very high structure that your eye doesn't catch the schach, so then you don't even know that you're sitting in the Sukkah. It's such a tall and massive structure, you're not going to notice that you're sitting in the Sukkah. It's pasul. Rav Zera said, no, it's not necessarily because you don't recognize the Sukkah to be a Sukkah, but because you need to be sitting in the tzel of the Sukkah. You need to be sitting in the shade of the schach. Sukkah again means schach. And if you have a very small Sukkah, which is very, very tall, then you're not sitting in the shade of the schach. You're rather sitting in the shade of the walls, the besel defanot, and that also is going to be pasul. And finally, Rabbah says the reason is not because of any of those, but practically speaking, a sukkah, leman yedu dorotechem ki pasukot hoshavti et bnei Yisrael, the mitzvah of Sukkah is that it should be Shivat Yamim, 7 days. It's a temporary dwelling. So the Torah is telling you that it has to be temporary, which means it has to be a structure that could be made in a temporary manner. If you are building something very small, you can make it with temporary material. You put a few things together, and that's your sukkah. But if you're making a structure that's 30 feet tall, you can't just put stuff together. It's going to collapse. It's too heavy. It's too tall. Winds affect it differently. Above 20 amot, you need to make a structure that is dirat keva. It's a solid piece of structure, and that's pasul. We need it to be something that is small enough that could be, if you would want it to, could be built in a flimsy, temporary, 7-day dwelling type of thing, and therefore that disqualifies something that's higher than 20 amot to be pasul. So those are the three different ways. Each one of them learned it from a pasuk, right? Each one learned this from the pasuk. Now, we will see later on in the Gemara in Daf Yud Aleph that the very concept of Sukkah commemorating Yetziat Mitzrayim by itself is a machloket Tanaim, really. Why do we celebrate Sukkah all together? It's machloket Tanaim. It's machloket Rabbi Eliezer and none other than Rabbi Akiva. Because we came out of Mitzrayim when? Well, in Nisan. Why do we even celebrate this in Chodesh Tishri? It's really a question that you have to ask and answer. Really, the Torah asks this question. The Torah asks is, why do we celebrate, unlike Pesach, that we take exact day of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and we celebrated with matzah on the night before they came out of Mitzrayim? So why is it that you wait 6 months until you celebrate it? So says the Torah, because a mitzvah that you do has to be known to people that you're doing it because of mitzvah. Imagine, especially in California, if it comes time for Nisan and you're going outdoor to eat your food and to dwell outside, well, so does everybody else. Everyone is in their gazebos and huts and they're eating outdoors. They're going outdoor because the weather is amazing. But guess what happens in Tishrei? When it comes time for October, people are getting in from the outdoor settings. It's becoming chilly. It becomes, fall time, winter time is setting in. That's when everyone's coming in. And you go out, people say, oh, why is he going out? And it's nikar, it is known they're doing it l'shem mitzvah. That's what the Torah says. Now, there are at least 500 answers to this question, because somebody actually authored the entire book on answering this question, all the different answers. But the Vilna Gaon answers probably the most fascinating answer, which has to do really with our question. Over here, the Vilna Gaon writes, this is in the Gaon in Mishlei, in Perek Aleph, Pasuk Dalet, I believe he says, that the commemoration of this Chag is not because of the Ananei Kavod, because the clouds of the glory that Klal Yisrael had on 15th of Nisan when they went out of Mitzrayim, but rather this commemorates a much different type of relationship that we have with Hashem, because we came out of Mitzrayim, everything was amazing, until we were on our own. And then we messed up for the first great time in history by doing Chet HaEgel, right? Mamash messed up. So what happens, says the Vilna Gaon, we lost immediately the Aranei Kavod. We lost our protection, right? What happened afterwards? So we did Tshuva, and we started building the Mishkan. The day we started building the Mishkan, wanting to bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu back to our midst. That's the Mishkan, right? We want V'asuli Mishkan v'shachalti betocham. Hashem says, whereas beforehand, you didn't need the Mishkan. Hashem was there. The glory of Hashem with Aranei Kavod was there. Now Hashem left, and we had to bring him back. And once we started actively building a Mishkan, that very day, the Aranei Kavod came back. What was that day? Well, it was exactly the 15th of Tishrei. And the Gaon makes the Chashbon. It's awesome, because again, they had sinned on Yud Zayin of Tammuz, and you have 1 day plus 40 days and 40 nights, right? And you do the Heshbon the exact day that the Shekhinah came back, when they started the structure, the building, the donations in the building of the Mishkan was on Chag HaSukkot. So this is actually commemorating the exact day of getting the Shekhinah back as our protection, as Aranei Kavod. On top of that, the other question that a person should ask is, why is it that we don't celebrate anything else of the miracle wonders and miracles of Yetziat Mitzrayim? We had also man, right? That's pretty amazing. They get a miraculous food that it doesn't have any waste and it tastes like whatever you want. and you have this water that you drink, and you remember everything that you learn, and it's, rolling with you wherever you. Awesome, right? So why don't you? And the Mefarshim says something amazing. So because when Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, we're going to die with our water. We're going to die with our food. Of course, He's going to provide food and water. But to make it geschmack, air conditioned with insulation of ananei kavod, and have it in the best, easy, pleasant way, that He didn't have to do. And what He does that makes it pleasant, that shows His care and concern. That is what we celebrate, because that is relationship. Relationships start where obligations end. Because in every relationship is like this. If you're obligated to do something, Chazaku Baruch, you have a gun to your head, you have to do it, fine. Or you're obligated for whatever reason it is that you're obligated, that's not so great. But when you do something that you're obligated to do, you're doing it out of love, you're doing it out of concern and care, that's something we celebrate. It's like, hence the Chag HaSukkot. But you see that Ananei Kavod, both, again, Rabbi Eliezer says, it is because of Ananei Kavod. Rabbi Akiva says, no, Sukkot mamash asu lahim. They actually build huts in coming out of Mitzrayim. So the obvious question is, when you have Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, who is the halacha like? It's always like Rabbi Akiva. You know why? Because there are two different principles in Shas. When you go through the entire Shas, rarely you find any time the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. Even though the Rabbi Eliezer was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva, we have spoken about before in our shiur several times that Rabbi Eliezer was Shemuti. He was in Shamta, right? Either was from Bet Shammai or he was in Shamta. Shamta means he was in Cherem. And that starts from a story that is discussed in Masechet Baba Metziah and Daf Nun Tet Amud Aleph, how he disagreed with the General Assembly of Chachamim and he did not back down from his argument, and he was put in Cherem. And someone that's in Cherem, Halakha is not like him. That's one. B, we have another general rule that almost every time when Rabbi Akiva is disagreeing with one of his peers, who is Halakha like? Rabbi Akiva. Right? So here, it should actually come out that Halakha should be like Rabbi Akiva according to all accounts, which means Sukkot mamash asu lahim. They actually built Sukkot. Now, if you pay attention, when we get to Daf Yud Aleph, we will be discussing this, Be'ezrat Hashem, that the girsa that we have in the Gemara is questionable girsa. There are others who have it exactly reversed. The names are different in the shitot that we have over there. But be that as it may, it is clear that even Rabbi Akiva, who says Sukkot mamash asu lahim, he agrees that we had Ananei Kavod, because here in our Gemara Daf Bet, Rashi clearly says in Daf Bet Amud Bet that we're going to study now that Sukkot is Zecher LaAnanei Kavod. We do it because of Ananei, and that's according to everybody. We had Ananei Kavod protecting us, even if you want to say that we had our own huts for privacy and for whatnot. Still, we had the nest of Ananei Kavod that we are celebrating. Oh, hence, the three-way machloket. Now, everything has to be based on the schach of the sukkah, zecher le'ananei kavod, and says the Gemara, you have the three-way machloket of the Amoraim, whether or not it is because of the recognition. When you walk in, you have to see the schach immediately, which is, again, the shita of Rabbah, or it's according to Rabbi Zera, that it has to be Sukkot Letzel Yomam, you have to be sitting under the shade, or it's like Rava, that you have to recognize Besukot Shevut Shivat Yamim, which has to be a temporary dwelling. Now the Gemara is going to go through a bunch of back and forth, trying to understand which one of this is really halachically feasible. So we start really the top of Amud Bet. Says the Gemara, Kuluhu ke Rabba lo Amri. Why are they not all in agreement like Rabba? Rabba says a good argument, right? Leman yedu dorotechem. The pasuk clearly says you have to know kibes sukkot shafti, right? So you have to know that you're sitting in the sukkah for reason of the mitzvah. So says the Gemara, hahu yedi'ah ledorotu. It's not telling you that every time that you enter the structure of sukkah, you have to see the schach. It means every generation you sit in the sukkah, you have to understand them doing this because Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, protected us with Aranei HaKavod. It has nothing to do with the awareness while you're sitting in the sukkah that your schach is above you. It has nothing to do with that. That's why they disagree with the Shita of Rabbah. Fine, we understand that. They can't all agree with Rabbi Zera either. In other words, the question is, Rabbi Zera says a nice argument as well, right? Rabbi Zera is saying good. The pasuk in Yeshaya says, "Sukkah tiyeh letzel yomam," which means the schach has to be in your shade. I mean, that's as explicit as it could be. So why doesn't everyone just agree with Rabbi Zera? Says the Gemara, because that pasuk in Yeshaya Navi is not a descriptive pasuk about the halachot of Sukkah 101. It is a prophecy about Yemot HaMashiach. It's telling you what's going to be in the time of Mashiach. Hahu limot HaMashiach hu dichtiv. If you take a look quickly at Rashi, the third line, Otam sukkot yu letzel le'oneg ulmastor. It's going to be amazing gazebos and sukkot we're going to have in the time of Mashiach, but it's not telling you, it's not indicative at all of what happens with the Sukkot mitzvah. Maybe Sukkot mitzvah, says Rashi, strong words, Eino letzel. Who says that you have to be sitting in the shade of the schach? He can't learn it from that pasuk. That's a prophecy about Mashiach. So, whereas we understand where Rabbi Zera is coming from, it's not a compelling argument that everyone says, oh, amazing. It's not. You could just argue and push it back that that's a prophecy, but Yemot HaMashiach. Fine, so that's 2 out of 3. But Rabbi Zera right away has a comeback. Just says, wait a second. No, that's not correct. Because if the pasuk in Yeshaya wants to just tell you what's happening in the time of Mashiach, why is he using the language of Sukkah? Sukkah is a very specific word. It is used for mitzvah Sukkah. If you want to tell me that they're going to have canopies and they're going to be having fun, oneg and ta'anug of Yemot HaMashiach, just tell me chuppah. Chuppah means the same thing, right? Well, we use chuppah for chuppat chatanim, but all chuppah means is a canopy. It's the same thing as Sukkah. It's just Sukkah is very specifically used for the mitzvah that we do on 15th day of Tishrei. So says Rabbi Zera, Im ken lemakra vechuppah tiyeh letzel yomam. Why doesn't the pasuk just say chuppah is going to be letzel yomam? Why does it use the word Sukkah? Umay sukkah tiyeh letzel yomam shamat minatarte. Says Rabbi Zera is coming to tell you both things. Yes, it is a prophecy about Yemot HaMashiach. But as it is prophesizing about Yemot HaMashiach, he also clarifies the halakha about Chag HaSukkot. So that's the comeback from Rabbi Zera. Amazing. Chazak Baruch. Says the Gemara, Ke Rava nami lo amri. Not everyone agrees with Rava, which is the third of the arguments. Either, remember, Rava says that we need a temporary dwelling of 7 days. So it can't be made something large over 20 amot, because over 20 amot you cannot make something flimsy. It has to be dirat keva. That was the argument. So why doesn't everyone agree with that? Well, it says the Sukkot Shivat Yamim should be a dwelling of 7 days. Says the Gemara, Mishum Kusha da Abaye. It is because of the powerful question that Abaye asked. You remember what Abaye asked? The bottom of the previous Amud, Abaye right away asked about 7 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Amar Abaye elamata asa mechisot shel barzel v'sichich al gabar chinami dura v'sukkah. Abaye said, if you want to tell me that it has to be a flimsy structure, if I have my house and I take down the ceiling, it's pasul because it's cement, because it's a dirat kiva. That was the argument he had. He says, what, you're telling me that you can't have a sturdy sukkah? So obviously the Rava answered, said, no, you could have a sturdy sukkah, but it means it has to be a structure that can be made flimsy and temporary. If it's above 20 amot, it cannot be built flimsy. It's going to fall apart. It has to be sturdy. That's the comeback of Rava, but nevertheless, the question of Abaye is a good question. So says the Gemara, because of that pushback, not everyone is compelled to learn like Rava. In other words, the Gemara goes through a process of showing us why none of the 3 are really compelling. They're not compelling. Each one has a raya from the pasuk. We understand it, a good, solid rayas from the pasuk, but they're not compelling to the degree that everyone says, oh, that's it. No. So now the Gemara is going to do something very interesting. Gemara is going to go through a bunch of halachot that have been said and stated by different Amoraim and try to, in process of elimination, figure out which one of these 3 did they hold like. Because again, this halachot, each one of them, not this halachot, this understandings of the 3-way understanding of the Amoraim, each one has a halachic nafkamina, a halachic difference in the actual practical halachot of Sukkah, right? For instance, the Gemara says it, and we're going to learn this together. The Gemara gives 3 examples of this. Says the Gemara, now 7 lines down. Keman azla adam Rabbi Yoshia. Which one of these 3 is Rabbi Yoshia that said in the name of Rav? Each one of the 3 that we're going to mention are different students of Rav in the name of Rav, right? So Rabbi Yoshia said in the name of Rav, machloket b'she'en defanot magiot l'schach. The only time that you have machloket over here is when the walls do not reach the schach. But if the walls go up all the way until the schach, you could have it as tall as you want. Even over the height of 20 amot, 30 feet, you can still build a sukkah and it will be kasher. Aval defanot magiot l'schach afilu lemala me'esrim ama keshera. Who is that like? Well, says the Gemara, it must be like Rabba. Keman ke Rabba. Daman mishum de lo shalta ba'ena. Rabba said the reason that's pasul over 30 feet is because your eye doesn't catch it. But you know what happens when you come into a sukkah and you see tall walls? Go like this, and your eye follows the walls. And once your eye follows the walls, you see the ceiling. Whenever you go to a wedding hall, to whatever it is, it's tall structure, you kind of like follow the walls and you go all the way up. So says Rabbi Yoshia, the only thing is because people don't realize they don't need the walls to get to the schach. If you have a balcony, for instance, you're making a sukkah to sleep in your balcony, right? And your balcony has fence around it. If the fence is 1 meter, that's about 39 inches, you're good to go. You don't need any other walls. You could just put poles and put a schach on top. You need no walls, no shears, no curtains, nothing. It's kasher, right? It may not be practical because it's windy and the bugs come and so on and so on. You may want to have more privacy and so on, but it's kasher. All you need is 10 tefachim wall, and then your sukkah could be 20 feet up, and you're good. So says the Gemara, that's the type of sukkah that has to be less than 20 amot, right? But if you have walls that go all the way to the schach, says Rabbi Yoshia in the name of Rav, your eye follows the wall, and you get to the schach, you notice it, so that's kasher. So says the Gemara, that's according to Rabbah, because according to Rav Zera, it makes no difference if the walls reach the schach or not, right? He's still not sitting in the shade of the schach. He's still sitting in the shade of the walls. So it's not Rabbi, and also the temporarily, not temporarily, doesn't make a difference if the walls reach the schach or not. So it must be that Rabbi Yoshia, in the name of Rav, holds like Rabbah. So that's one. Says the Gemara, "Vekevan the defanot magio leschach mishlat shalta ba'ena." Once the walls are reaching all the way up to the schach, your eye follows the wall, and you notice the schach chazak baruch, it is kasher. So you can have higher than 30 feet, and you're good to go. One more attempt. Keman azla amar Rav Huna amar Rav. Now, this time not Rav Yoshia, but Rav Huna in the name of Rav. A different halacha. Machloket b'shem ba'ela arba amot. This machloket that we have in the Mishnah, whether or not over 20 amot is kasher. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda says over 20 amot is kasher. Chachamim disagree, right? Chachamim says over 20 amot pasul. Rabbi Yehuda says no, kasher. Says Rav Huna, this machloket, it's only when you have a small sukkah, a 4 amot by 4 amot, right? It's 6 feet by 6 feet. But if you have a larger sukkah, Chazaku Baruch, you could have it taller than 20 amot and you're good to go. Who is that like? Does it make a difference according to Rabbah how big your sukkah is, the surface? No. You come in, you either notice it or you don't notice it, right? It doesn't make a difference how big it is. But the bigger the shetach, the surface of your sukkah is, now imagine if you have a tall sukkah, but it is like 200 feet wide. Are you sitting in the shade of the schach? Of course you are. Right? It's all a matter of how big it is. So that is the Rabbi Zera. Says the Gemara, Rav Huna, in the name of Rav, turns out to be like Rabbi Zera, because says Rav Huna, the only machloket Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda is when you have a minimum small size of sukkah, 4 by 4 amot, then you can't have it taller than 20. But if you have a massive sukkah, bigger than 4 amot by 4 amot, you could have it taller than 20, and you're still sitting in the shade of the schach, right? So that follows Rabbi Zera, right? See, this is two students of Rav saying two different halachot in the name of Rav, the Rebbe, and one of them turns out to be like Rabbah, the other one turns out to be like Rabbi Zera so far. Now the third one is the most interesting. Says the Gemara, Keman Rabbi Zera damar mishum tzelhu vekevan the revicha ikasel sukkah. We're just finishing up the second one. That once it's bigger than 4 amot, the surface of the sukkah, you're going to be sitting in the shade of the schach, even if it's taller than 20. Now the third one is Keman Azla Hadamar Rav Chanan bar Rabba. Rav Chanan bar Rabba said in the name of Rav again, Machloket b'shena machzeket ela kedei rosho v'rubo v'shulchano. The machloket is when you have a minimalistic sukkah. That means it's only kedei rosho rubo v'shulchano. We'll get to this momentarily in the next upcoming dapim. What is the minimum shiur of sukkah? Is it rosho v'rubo, which is 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim, right? This big, right? Small, mamash, small sukkah. I don't know if you saw, there's this guy that was walking last week, had a sukkah on wheels attached to his bike. Yeah. Anyone saw that? Yeah. It's tall, like, it was less as lavud to the ground, less than 3 tfachim to the ground, and it had 3 walls, and a leaf on a bamboo thing on the top, and he was moving with his bike wherever he went. You could stand in there and eat your sandwich. So 6 by 6 is rosho rubo, but not shulchano. 7 by 7, it adds also your sandwich, right? Because back in the day, they would lean, do not stand. They would lean, so the majority of the body you could fit with the sandwich. That's 7 by 7. Or, as we'll see in the Gemara, maybe the minimum amount is 4 by 4, 4 amot by 4 amot. which is much larger, right? We'll get to that. But here says Rab Chanan bar Rabba, only when you have a minimum sukkah of 7 by 7 tfachim, tiny sukkah, that's when you can't have it bigger, taller than 20 amot. But as soon as it's more than 7 tfachim, you're good to go. Now the Gemara says, who is that like? The only one that it could be is like Rabbi Zera. But Gemara says Rabbi Zera also doesn't make sense. 20 amot is so tall and 7 tfachim is so small that 7 tfachim and a half is going to be okay now. He's going to be sitting in the shade of Sukkah, chas v'shalom. Not chas v'shalom, but no way, right? It's not going to happen. So the Gemara says, you know who that is like? Like nobody. The Keman, the no Keman. It's not like any of the 3 shitot of the Amoraim that we discussed in the Gemara. So says the Gemara, אבל מחזקת יותר מקטע ראשו ורובו ושולחנו, אפילו למעלה מ-20 אמה כשרה, says the Gemara, כמן דלא כחד. It's not like any of the 3. Now Rashi doesn't explain what this is, but the Tosafot explains a 4th reason. You ready for this? So the Gemara says 3. Here's the 4th one. Says the Tosafot, you know why? If you take a look at the 5th Tosafot, the Dibur HaMatchil Keman, v'divrei Rab Chanan bar Rabba sricha tama. If you can't just drop a bombshell and say it's not like anybody, so who is it like? What's the logic behind it? So it says the Tosafot, v'yesh mefarshim mishum da'avalesh lul shel tarnegolin. This is not a dwelling for a human being. This is like a chicken coop. It's so small and it's so tall. It's weird. You need a place that is a place of dwelling, of at least minimum dwelling for a human being. And therefore, kevan de gvia vektina, once it's so tall and so narrow, it is like a lul shel tarnegolim, and it's not considered a sukkah. That's what the Tosafot says. Fine. Be that as it may, says the Gemara, let's just do 3 more lines. Bishlama, Rabbi Yoshia pliga ad Rabbi Huna, Rabbi Chanan bar Rabba. We understand that Rabbi Yoshia, the first one that we just mentioned today, is arguing with the other ones. And the argument is very well crafted on why the 20 amot is kasher or pasul, when it's going to be kasher. Rav Chanan bar Rabba is arguing this Rabbi Yoshia is disagreeing with Rav Huna and Rav Chanan bar Rabba. Deinu kayavi shiura b'mashch, because they are giving you a shiur in how big the sukkah has to be for it to be kasher even above 20 amot. He is not giving a shiur in the size of the sukkah. Rav Yoshia is giving what? What is he giving?
The size of the base.
Rav Yoshia, the first one that is discussed today, says, when is it kasher above 20 amot? Huh? The walls go all the way up. It's not a matter of size. It's a matter of my eyesight. If he catches it, you're good to go. So we understand that that's cholek, that is disagreeing clearly with them. Right? That we have no problem with. This is a genius question. Genius. We just said moments ago, and we said it because we intended to come back to this discussion, we will have very soon in our Gemara a machloket on what is the minimum kosher size of sukkah. Some say it's 4 amot. Anything less than 4 amot, 6 by 6, is pasul. And some say zayin by zayin tfachim, small, 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim. That's an existing machloket, actually in real time. So says the Gemara, who told you that the 2 last ones here, they're arguing about 20 amot, not 20 amot? maybe their argument is, what is the smallest sukkah that's kasher? One of them holds the smallest sukkah that's kasher is 7 by 7. And the other one holds the smallest sukkah that's kasher is 4 amot by 4 amot. And they're saying the same exact thing. Each one of them says, this Mishnah that we had, Bet Amud Aleph, the first Mishnah in the Masechta, that you can't have taller than 20 amot, is talking about the minimum size of a kosher sukkah. But anything bigger than the minimum is going to be kasher, even if it's taller than 20 amot. But one of them holds the minimum kosher size is 7 by 7 tefachim. The other one holds minimum size is 4 by 4 amot. Who told you that they're arguing? It's a genius question. So says the Gemara, the more savar echsher sukkah ב4 amot, more savar echsher sukkah במחסקת ראשו ורובו ושולחנו. Gemara says no. The kule alma echsher sukkah ראשו ורובו ושולחנו. Everybody agrees. We paskin the Gemara, and everybody agrees here. Says the Gemara that the minimum amount of kosher sukkah is Rosho v'rubo v'shulchano, which is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. Right? That's the minimum size of the sukkah. But says the Gemara, v'hacha ba'a kamifligi. The more savar b'machseket Rosho v'rubo v'shulchano peligi, aval yoter mi-Rosho v'rubo v'shulchano divrei hakol keshera, umor savar מראשו ורובו בשולחנו עד דלת אמות פליגי, אבל יותר מדלת אמות דברי הכל כשרה. The machloket over here is, when do you have a machloket Rabbi Meir and Chachamim? Everyone agrees that normally speaking, if you have an 8-foot sukkah, small sukkah, 7 by 7 tefachim is good enough. So one of them says, that is machloket in Bet Amud Aleph in Masechet Succah, that already by anything bigger than 7 by 7 tefachim, you could have taller than 20 amot. Only by minimum you can't. And the other one says, no. From 7 tefachim until 6 foot, right, until 4 amot, it's machloket that you cannot have, according to Chachamim, taller than 20 amot. Above 4 amot by 4 amot, 6 foot by 6 foot, then you could have taller than 20 amot, and that is our machloket. So, to wrap up what we learned so far, which this is basically Excel. This is where it ends our basic discussion of today. We have a 3-way machloket Amoraim. What exactly the reason is between 20 Rabbi Meir and Chachamim, why 20 amot is pasul, and when could be higher than 20 amot and still be kasher. Now, according to Rava, you can almost never have something that is higher than 20 amot and it will be kasher, because now there's sturdy. It has to be made sturdy. But according to Reb Zera and according to Rabba, you could have incidents. You could have certain scenarios, certain cases that even higher than 20 amot will be kasher, either because the walls are reaching the schach, or because you could, according to Rabbi Zera, you can still be sitting in the cell when your sukkah is wide enough, and that would be the halacha as well, as we'll discuss some of the cases of halacha l'maaseh, hashlachot maasiyot be'ezrat Hashem in the days to come.